Hi everyone. Great to see so many of you here today. I hope you're enjoying Lightbox. We're nearly at the end. It's gone so quickly, right? We've got Nicholas Kole here. He's going to be doing his talk today for you. Yeah, that's. I'm kind of at the end of the point. I'm just like, is my brain even functioning anymore? It's been so much on, but hope you enjoy, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Georgie. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Sorry in advance for my voice. This may be a bit, I think only this range works correctly right now. It's been an awesome con so far. So thank you so much for coming. This is sort of going to be a bit of a mixed presentation. I'll open up for Q&A a bunch, and I'll do some live drawing as well as just some walking through my process. But the title is Picking Up the iPad, and what I wanted to talk about specifically was sort of my journey from basically using Photoshop exclusively for a decade and migrating suddenly, kind of cold turkey, about 4 years ago to the iPad, and how that's sort of changed my life and my process, the way that I sort of think through my work. So a little bit about me for those of you who don't know, although I feel like I know almost every one of you from Twitter, which, by the way, I'm sorry about the memes. I'm a character designer and illustrator. I graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design like 10 years ago and moved directly into video games as a sort of wee character boy. And sort of hopped from famous studio to famous studio. As you all know, Project Copernicus destroyed World of Warcraft far back in the year 2012. And then, what's that? Exactly, it didn't. It fell apart. And then I moved on, of course, to destroy League of Legends and the amazing Dawn Gate, which also crashed and burned. Incredible projects with wonderful teams of people and a lot of potential. But I think inherently this industry is a really choppy one and has a lot of instability kind of baked into it, especially games. Games, like with film, you're using like a decades-old, super historied medium that changes relatively little and quite slowly over time. And in games, you're like inventing the pencil every time before you sit down to draw. So every new game involves inventing an entirely new system to create and make that game fun. So that happens a lot of churn, and the churn kind of brought me here. So in 2012, I decided to quit and go freelance. Going freelance was like the first huge leap for me, and the first year of that really sucked, and that'll be a whole other talk, some other Lightbox. But it took about a couple of years to sort of get out of a bit of a slump there. Started to build clients, and as you probably know, I kind of live half on the internet. It's like very natural sort of feeling for me. And sort of engaging online means meeting people like you, and I met someone very special who was about the whole country width away from me. And at the time, I suddenly was sort of falling in love, and I wanted to get very quickly very far away and realized that my enormous Cintiq setup wasn't going to cut it. And this is so cheesy, but it's really actually like legitimately the reason I bought an iPad to begin with was because I had like a 3,000-mile trip to make to meet a girl. I went to the Apple store, the pencil. This was like the month that it dropped for the first time. I tried out an Apple, the pencil, the iPad Pro for the first time, and immediately felt like, yeah, it'll do. I could make it work, and I saw people sort of also making it work around me, and some of the promotional art that was coming out really early at the time by James Jean in particular was like a major like, oh yeah, no, if he can do it, I can do it. And in a sense, that's what I've wanted to pass forward as much as possible. Is that it is wholly possible to make the switch if that's something that you want. And I wanted it pretty bad back around, I think it was 2014, 2015. So I picked up the machine, and I flew really quick. Around that time, I was doing a book with Disney Publishing for Pete's Dragon, the movie, doing some illustrations for that. And I was in the middle of like a Photoshop frenzy, trying to get everything done, my T's crossed and I's dotted. I got stuck. This was like a tight deadline. You guys have probably been in similar situations where I had exactly like 3 weeks to do like 4 like illustrations and a cover. And some of you are probably a lot faster than I am, but that's not a lot of time for me, especially when it's like Disney. But I got stuck in Florida on a trip, and had only my iPad for company. Had this moment of like, if I don't learn how to finish these illustrations on the iPad right now, I'm screwed. These illustrations will not exist. So that was a really steep learning curve, but it actually worked out incredibly. And I think being sufficiently motivated is like a really great generator of change and of growth for me. I think probably a lot of us learn the hard way. But it was like a real serious sort of long-term adjustment for me. And mostly what I do is character design. So what that generally entails, and I'll show you like a quick recent example of some of that. So this is Jenkins from the podcast of the Adventure Zone. What that means is that I'm taking sort of the rough, unpolished, earliest scrap notes and thoughts from my coworkers on a given project, cobbling those together, trying to understand as much as I can about the context of where it's going to fit in the project as a whole, and then doing a bunch of rough sketches, getting feedback, doing a second round, doing a third, starting to flesh it out progressively over time. When I was originally working, my work was very tight, very line art heavy work that I was doing in Photoshop. And the technique I was using was based in a lifelong love of comics and illustration of a very particular kind. And I learned from comics that there's a penciler, an inker, a colorist, and then someone who does the lettering. And so I worked as though I were 4 people. I worked as though I were first the penciler, doing a whole penciler's job, then the inker, meticulously inking each line to perfection so that it was just right, and then the colorist coming in and trying not to screw up the inking that I had just done. And I suck at lettering, so let's not talk about that. So the process of that is designed like a factory line, right? You're receiving one thing. The reason comics are made that way is because comics move incredibly fast. My wife is a storyboard artist. Oh yeah, spoiler alert, I married her. So Procreate got me married, and that's why I'm here. Maybe in a couple of years, this will be the pun of all time. So I was working as though I were super pressed for time in a way that I wasn't. I was working as though I were trying to churn out something that I could pass to other artists. The reason a penciler does super meticulous pencils is because an inker is a whole different person and has to read those and then do the next step. Same with colorists. And as I just described with character design, the process is back and forth and here and there. And, oh, we like him, but could he be blue? Oh, could we put a mustache on him? And the steps that I was taking and the method that I had already sort of begun to calcify into, it was turning out to actually be like kind of poisonous for the work that I was doing. It was fighting me every step of the way. I'm still working on this analogy, and I wish that for this presentation specifically I had it perfectly in order, but I think about it like cooking, where if you're trying to make a cake, you can't cook all the individual ingredients one at a time and then combine them at the end and expect to get a cake. You're going to have some burnt flour, some loose sugar, a couple of strawberries in a pile. Everything has to sort of be equally unfinished until everything is finished at once. And aside from just pure technique stuff that I'm going to be talking about, if there was anything I could pass on, it would be consider that. Consider that part of my early process that came out of Photoshop and came out of things that I hadn't questioned, things that just I inherited from other disciplines, wasn't serving me because I wanted every step to be fully finished and fully presentable. I wanted to show everybody every step of the way, exactly how beautiful it looked, and have crisp, perfect things. It's like if you guys have sketchbooks, probably some of you have struggled with the idea that it's a portable art gallery that everybody is scrutinizing, that you need to like make notes like, this sucks, don't look at the eyeball, which like no one reads but you and maybe like one significant other at some point in the future, and is like, oh, you have problems. So your process doesn't have to be beautiful, and the way to a finish doesn't have to be the finish itself. So those were things that I found as I began to adapt my process to the iPad, were huge adjustments. The other main thing, and I'm just going to say this up front, I'll probably say it 2 or 3 more times until you're absolutely sick of hearing it, but a new tool is a new opportunity to learn, and not necessarily, it's not right to expect a new tool to be the same as an old tool. If you were moving from a ballpoint pen to a dipping nib, or going from like, inked lines to oil paint, you would understand intuitively, this is going to be a whole new learning curve and something I need to really adapt to. And I think with digital apps, we don't have the same patience or give it the same leeway to understand that, like, when I open Procreate, it's different than opening Photoshop. It's different than opening Clip Studio. It's different than opening MS Paint, or, these things have different strengths and weaknesses. And the results are going to vary as I found out. So this is like my current example of like a highly polished version of this. Initially, it didn't start out like that. When I initially began experimenting with the iPad, my character work was really quite loose. And I would be moving really quickly. I found that the line art that I did perfectly, especially at the time, this was like before a lot of features that now have been added were added. That line art and the stabilizing of the lines, the glass texture and the stylus itself, I found sort of hard to get used to. And so what I found was an opportunity to get really sloppy, really messy, and rediscover my design process, because at least for character design, and I think in a lot of parts of the pipeline, the work we're doing is only like 5% the finished product. The work is the thinking. The work is the friends we made along the way. The work is, all of the iteration and the conversations and the ideas. And I remember hearing initially, and I still hear it every now and again, this like, well, the iPad is a fine tool for sketching, but I don't know about finished work. And it's like, all right. Excuse me. I was literally full-time for 4 years. I try to be more gracious, but it depends on what you mean by finished work and what you want out of that process. Oil paint is not going to work for everyone in this room. Watercolor is a nightmare for some people who love acrylics. And Procreate, for me, has been a tool that I found I could really adapt to and figure out. But it also meant that I had to change as well. So a couple of early examples of that. This is a little witch that I did. And you can see like all the information's still there. It's very much still me. I still really like this piece, but if I were to pass this off to a modeler in my line of work, they would have some very serious questions about like what's going on here. Like there's a lot of mess going on that was inherent to the process that I think is really fun. And definitely experimentation like that like causes your mind to wake up. I think when you settle into a process that you're super used to, it can be just not conducive to having new thoughts. Because when you do the same line over and over again with the same tool the same way, you're not afraid. You're not wondering. When I was traveling and dating my wife, Erica, I was coming out to Vancouver, and I had no idea where I was. It can be very intimidating, and if you're an anxious person like I am, it could be very triggering in that regard. You're just like, I need to know things. I need to have plans. I need to know street maps. It can be very liberating as finding out that actually you're a competent adult, and that you can like actually learn about a new city and make changes that you didn't think that you could. And when you do begin to regain mastery, you have a whole new skill set, a whole new map of place in your head, a whole new set of recommendations. And by the way, if you come to Vancouver, like there's only one coffee shop you need to go to, so ask me after. There's definitely some coffee shops I would avoid. because I've ruined it there. The iPad has opened up like the space to me as well. That's another big step that changed a lot of the way I work and think and live. Was going into from one room, in the dark, often getting really stir crazy. Now to sort of the opposite problem where I'm in coffee shops and I'm, overhearing the strangest conversations. I've been privy to a psychic consultation, the seniors Tinder dating for the first time ever, the weekly meeting of two women who share their erotic short fiction with each other, about as far from me as like the front row is. So if I have my AirPods in, that does not mean that they're on. I'm definitely listening to you. I'm definitely texting my wife about it. There's just like so many sort of weird stories and encounters that come out of that. And so for me, both the benefit of travel, as well as the opportunity to learn something new and change my process were kind of fully worth the price of admission and the sort of kit. Because again, when I started this, I was using an early version of this that does not have liquify, which was like huge to my process. Masking is an enormous thing that I used to use in Photoshop. Now I use it all the time on the iPad, but I had to find these workarounds. Everybody really got upset about the gradient tool not existing, but I found that using a large soft brush, and I'll demonstrate that in a bit, gives me control over gradients that aren't just like a single geometric shape. And one of the big selling points was the moment that I tilted the pencil for the first time and in a single stroke got like a line and then like a little cloud of beautiful shape. And that began to make me think like, oh, if I could do that intuitively, the easier you make that, the more you streamline it, the further the tool gets out of your way. I don't have to switch brushes. And just that, I mean, how many of you have like one brush you use? Show of hands. How many of you have two? Okay. Do you guys find it like difficult ever to just even begin to want to try a new brush out? Like, even moving into the menu to be like, oh, I think I'll, today I'll try, a richly textured pastel. Like, there's never a time, especially with a deadline, that you're like, now is the best time for me to delete years of progress and start afresh. And it can change the way you're thinking. And if the thinking is the work, then the tool needs to stay out of the way of your thinking. But the tool can also cause you to be more awake and aware, like I was when I was lost in Vancouver initially and trying to figure out, like, okay, that's east, so I'm lost. I saved a couple little files in here of my wife and I meeting in Vancouver. I've kind of blown past that portion of the story, but I wanted you to see that. It's really cute. Together we've been, traveling across the world. We've been to New York. I took a trip to go to Maui together, where we had pretty much the worst travel snafu of my life. But I managed to make all my deadlines anyways, so that was fine. And we painted a mural, which was really neat, in my aunt's apartment. I've been to Japan. I'm hoping to go back again. Able to travel and make my way over here. So it's really opened up a lot of opportunities in a way that I was really excited about. And I think when something is scary and new and is going to challenge things that are really comfortable and familiar to you, if it's also exciting, that's what you need to know about saying yes. If it's exciting, a yes is, I would say, imminent or highly possible, and that will give you the fuel, the jet boost you need to get out of orbit. If the enthusiasm isn't there, and you're like, the iPad, I could take or leave it, then all of the work that goes into actually figuring it out is just going to be a total slog. Same with marriage. I mean, if you're not excited about your spouse, it's going to really suck to live together. So I found, sometimes that the looseness that I was playing with was a setback, and sometimes it was this invitation to really open up and create new looks and things in my work that I didn't know I was capable of. I don't know if Alex DeBlanc is here. I know he's on the convention somewhere, but I started to like take in new influences, and a lot of people who are here who terrify me, and I've had a hard time even beginning to work up the courage to talk to, started to come into my work, and I filled the canvas with all these new ideas. It was this cool opportunity to take a break and move in a new direction, which kind of has taken me all the way up to the present and some very seriously large projects. This piece was actually intended to be about this actual size. This was for Sci-Fi Channel and DeviantArt for bus side in San Diego Comic-Con. It didn't wind up being on a bus, wound up being on like some water bottles, but it could have been. And I did it start to finish on the iPad. There are some serious detractors, so like I'm definitely pretty Pollyannish about like it's amazing. But you know, the layer cap is definitely a struggle for most people. I would say that's probably one of the biggest barriers most people have to even picking it up to begin with, is knowing that like the size of your canvas will limit the amount of layers you have access to. And for people who really want to be able to like go back and you know, that's a pretty tough one. Some things about brush behavior as well. You know, actually, it looks like you have a question. Yes, he said it's huge. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to show you in detail. So the question was, what do I do in the situation where I have like an enormous file and I want to get a lot of layers out of this? So with this, you know, the concept, basically I was offered carte blanche by the client. The client said, hey, here's a very vague prompt. It was something like evolutionary science fiction. I was like, can I do some animals? They were like, sure. Um, can they be dragons? They were like, yeah, all right. So I had this completely open prompt. All right, this is not very elegant. Get all of my coffee shakes in the experience. Um, it's completely open prompt, a deadline, a really cushy budget on this one, which was great. But this challenge to sort of create a piece of this scale on the iPad from start to finish. And at this point, I was like 3 years into this, and like I don't even know where my Cintiq is. Like it's in the basement. I haven't touched it. I literally haven't. It went away the day I bought this, and it really hasn't come out of the box since. Um, so it was the only option. It was like I have to make this work. I will find a way. Um, so mileage may vary on like setting up all of the pressure and accountability and then like squeezing you into the toothpaste tube of gotta do this. But for me, I find that's often pretty motivating. Um, so I realized, you know, okay, what's the minimum, you know, dimensions I can work in that will work for the client? So 10,000 pixels on one side was going to suffice. It's not great, but you know, for me, that's the biggest I could go. Um, in general, by the way, as an aside, my work is quite small comparatively. I know I've talked to a lot of people here. When I ask about their like actual canvas sizes, I'm like, yeah. whoa, whoa. I work usually, actually, almost every piece starts with a standard. When you open Procreate, um, you have an option over here. Um, pause for effect. To sort of use sizes that you've already used before. And I should clean this up, but I only ever use this one, the 25 by 3500. So my canvases are always sort of a loosely paper-shaped 2500 pixels by 35. Usually because it's concept work and it's not intended to be published or printed as a poster or on a bus, that tends to work out just fine because we're talking about ideas. And where a napkin would suffice at the beginning, certainly a smaller canvas will do just fine. And also, the bonus with this size is that the brushes that I use are designed really well to hold up texture-wise at that size. Like I get everything that I want out of the two main brushes that I use, which I will also talk extensively about. I get all the like sort of grit and texture at exactly the scale I want, whereas when I get bigger, it's harder for those brushes to come meet me there. But and also the third thing is that the layers I get as a possibility here are like a lot more than I would. I believe the sci-fi piece that I just showed you, the migration piece, that is like maybe 6 to 10 layers tops. That was it for the actual file. Like, it was a real limitation. I'm still going, kids. I'm just gonna stop there. It didn't even stop me. So I'm gonna delete this file because I have a feeling that's now it's got like 57 ghost layers. It's gonna be weird. Um, Not the secrets. Here, okay. So this is what the folder with that piece in it looks like. Um, what I did was I created a master file of that size. I had, I think, 6 to 10 layers available to me in that file. Even at the beginning of this process, I'm like, okay, it's going to be huge, right? So I need to come up with an idea that I can create with the limitations that I have. So when I thought of this migration of all these creatures, I realized like I can break these creatures out into individual chunks and then put them together at the end. And that's basically the strategy here, right? So I create one master file, I do a loose sketch. That's 1 or 2 layers of like, really scribbly loose stuff. Collapse that into 1 layer for sure, right? Then I'm doing more sort of delicate line art over that. Maybe that's 3 to 4 layers, collapsing at different times, creating a line art version of the whole piece that feels like, okay, I can now move forward and proceed with this. Again, I don't cook it all the way because I don't want burnt flour. I want just enough information to move to the next part of the process. After that, and this was like I think where it began, I start to block out. And those of you familiar with my process videos, this is sort of the first stage always. I go in and I take each chunk, each creature of an illustration, or if it's a character design, it's just the one. And I create the silhouette that helps me, gives me a mask, gives me a shape that I won't go outside of. And where I used to invest all that time sort of getting the perfect inked line, now I invest that time in getting like the perfect edge. So say the sketch line here is this really loose. Well, that's not the brush or layer I want to be on. The sketch is really loose, and I do it in 2 seconds. This is this like rough line to describe the horn. But then you're seeing, I mean, I go in and I create these ridges where I know that I want the ridges of the horn to actually be. So this part is more like inking. I'm getting really specific about the silhouette of the piece that I want and the needs I foresee. And then each of those I broke out into their own separate document. And that document, because it was, a little more flexible, had a little more sort of layers that closer to 10 or whatever that I could work in. So you're seeing all those here. So it's just the big guy here. He starts with his silhouette, and then I add detail layer by layer onto that piece by piece. Which is great, because then I have all of this time to actually focus on the character design details of each creature, which seemed initially like, I want to work the whole piece at once, and I want to make sure everything's in perfect balance. And that's true of a lot of illustration work I do. I like to sort of push and pull the whole canvas at once. I also find that taking a trust fall into a new thing and saying like, I actually trust myself at this point to be able to integrate all of these elements at the end. And I kind of know when I have a good roadmap, like I'm going to be able to do this by the time this is wrapped up. But now, whereas pushing and pulling means that these guys in the background become blurry blobs that got zero attention because, I'm actually more interested in one area or the other. In this case, they all got to have a unique design and a more specific attention paid to them. So it wound up being actually kind of a strength, and as that built and built, I would move the new layers into the next file and the next file and keep them flat, but then move all of them into the master file where finally each creature was integrated, and I do something I just call fluff, where I just added like blooms and light and soften the edges and create something that sort of sets them all in the space and the same lighting together. So I know that probably sounds pretty complicated and a little thinky, and it is. But I think there's nothing wrong with, at least it hasn't been for me, like embracing the fact that sometimes something is like drawing on a piece of paper, and sometimes it's like putting on a set of Legos and constructing something. And bringing both of those types of thinking to play, I find changes the scenario ever so slightly enough that new ideas come out and new strengths emerge from the piece. I got a gig a while ago where I worked for Hasbro on the Play-Doh team. I literally worked in Play-Doh while I was there. So I was the guy in the office, the cubicle. I like dragged a giant cutout of Elmo in front of my like cubicle door, and I sat on the floor just surrounded by cans of Play-Doh, and would just be rolling dough, kind of like a feral child. And people would come in, and I'd like leave very frightened. Um, the but the for that project, the fact is like when you're working in Play-Doh, you can't just draw it. You have to smell it. You have to touch it. You have to get your hands dirty and into it because otherwise, what are you doing? Like the idea is inherently part of the medium there, and so learning again through the process and embracing what that brings to it has been a huge thing. Um, Let me see about breaking this down a little bit. So again, just a quick look into how process goes. This is a piece from my personal project, Jellybots. This is another version where I had all the layers in one file. It's not so big. It's my standard 25 by 35. But because I knew I wanted this sort of soft focus that kind of just lasered in on this, and I wanted to experiment with that, I had to create this file with that Lego building mentality so that I could sort of build it out instead of getting super painty. So the way that began is with the character himself. So the character begins simpler. We'll take these layers away bit by bit. With the silhouette itself. I have a line art layer over this, like the sketch, and I'll create the silhouette based on that sketch. He's got some jelly, so of course there's the jelly. And then the next big part for me is always this multiply painting step. This is kind of where I do get to get really painty and drawy in that old traditional sense. It feels like sculpting. So this layer itself, the multiply layer, is just a layer set to multiply where all of the shape kind of shadows are. How am I thinking of? Art Samich, kind of, if you guys are familiar with his work. I think it's Sam Nielsen, right? He posted some process stuff to do with ambient occlusion and working through his paintings as though they were 3D models, which blew my mind. And at first, probably some of you were looking at all these layers that I'm showing you, and you're like, no, forget this. This is ridiculous. I just want to draw. I felt that way about Art Sandwich's tutorials. I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. It's ridiculous. I want to draw. I don't want to model. But actually, I've completely adapted the process over time. It's actually a really cool way to think through it. And it's not, as you get into it and it becomes more natural, it's not as sort of fully weird and alien and left-brained as all that. So that brings a lot to just the flats that I begin with. And then slowly I add sort of soft rim lighting, bit by bit, some overlay glows with a big soft brush, little highlights on top of that. So now I have my character in a folder where I can just move him around wherever I want, fully transparent, which is great. Then I begin to build the background itself. So that usually starts out like a big blurry blob mess. I'm using just the simple Gaussian blur tools. I know that Photoshop has some pretty amazing sort of nuanced blurring. For this, I just was working with what I had. And then each layer of the background, based on a sketch, I began to build and blur and build and blur, physically structuring it as though you were going to almost animate the parallaxing kind of space. But each layer got more blur, to sort of just create that effect in general. More or less, I guess to say. And slowly, by doing that, by embracing basically the method I learned from that sci-fi piece of thinking through the layers on a process where I didn't need to worry about layer limits, I was thinking about construction and got a whole new look out of my work that I never had before, because just the app was teaching me, which is sort of stupid and trite to say, but there we go, I said it. There's the fluff, just to bring him out, at the very end, integrating these two kind of separate things, kind of creating a little bloom behind him and a little drop shadow to kind of ground him in the space. And then with a little bit extra, attention to detail, you wind up with a finished piece. So So I was gonna just throw rehydrated Ganondorf up on the screen. Yeah, question. Mm, okay. So the question, I know it's hard to hear, so I'll be repeating questions. I know this is kind of awkward, but the question was, do I always have a mentality of passing it to a modeler even when I'm not going to pass it to a modeler? Because obviously in this case, officially I wasn't. Accidentally, an incredibly talented modeler came in and modeled this piece, which turned out to be amazing. Uh, but the answer is kind of yes and no. A lot of the time, because I'm doing that all the time and kind of excited about practicing that and really getting into volume, because as I left line art behind when I realized that Procreate, when it didn't have Streamline and some of those other features I wanted, um, wasn't giving me the line quality I wanted, started to just try without line and use shape. And then shape led to volume, and volume led to a improvement. Like the modelers were like, "Thank you." And it was like, "This is very good. I like this. This sort of feels more healthy. It feels more like integrated into the actual pipeline that I use and work in all the time." Um, so I do that a lot. In some pieces, I'll just pull up a random one. I don't think about it at all. Sometimes it's really lovely to just turn your brain off and go full 2D. Where like this Venom fan art, for instance, like that's just about the gestalt shape, like just the silhouette. That's all I care about. And I got to do line art, and because there's a little bit of streamlining now, and I've gotten a brush sort of set up that I really like, the line arts come back, and I love doing that too. So really, ultimately, nothing is lost, and I just learned about volume in addition. Um, so I'm gonna just throw Ganondorf into video mode because that was another like major game changer for me. Is that even the simple step of I'm gonna hit record on a separate app before I begin a drawing? Who does that? Like, also when I do that, the drawing sucks. Like I'm immediately self-conscious. And what was cool about Procreate is that it just records the process in the background so that you know it's recording no matter whether you're self-conscious of it or not. So I'll just hit that replay. Um, so I'm gonna definitely do some demo stuff, but I'd like to keep that sort of specific to any questions you guys have or things you definitely want to see. Um, but as that's going on, yeah, this is like all the fan art I pulled, and this is sort of a piece that I wanted to do, like as just participating in the community excitement over this design and the trailer that dropped. So I always bring all my reference right into the file, arrange it. Sometimes really like claustrophobically, it's a little annoying. Sometimes I'll split screen it or I'll use a different device. Um, but sometimes it's actually nice to have it right there. Um, and I'll go in and just begin the sketch really loosely. And you'll just see that sketch started taking shape right now. But if you guys have any questions, yeah. Yeah. Yes, actually, that's exactly what I did for that. So, sorry. The question was, with other pieces like the dragon piece that are also similarly sort of scaled, do I use the same process? Right? I break it out into files. Riot splash art? Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. There's actually some Riot artists in here, so I don't want to talk about stuff I don't know. You can ask them afterwards specifically what the dimensions are they work in. But, you know, the pieces actually that usually wind up online, sometimes those are created just for the internet. And often that's where I live, like in terms of work. So it's either created for the project or for online dissemination. And the resolutions don't actually have to be that crazy for that. They can be, and they're increasing. And I find also with Procreate, I get a pretty good breadth depending on the needs of the piece and a good amount of layers to work with. As long as I'm willing to kind of just get over a little bit of my anxiety about like having to flatten occasionally or move into another file. Um, it's getting beefier. What's that? He's hydrating in front of your eyes. Speaking of which, yes. You were first. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how do I split screen? Do I use a different app or something like that? Well, the iPad itself just does that naturally. So if you just, oops, sorry, if I, if I drag up here, I'm a little nervous because I didn't prep this, but if I were to pull my, oh man, this is all like work stuff. I can do Twitter. Everyone does Twitter. You click and drag, and now Twitter is in the sidebar right here, and I can browse my tweets. I can make that larger or smaller, and I can use that, and I can draw right in here at the same time. Oh, if I have the right layer selected, I hit my limit. I could draw right in here the whole time, and usually even palm rejection is pretty good for that. So I never like accidentally tweet something, but now I'm afraid that you're reading my tweets and I don't know what they are. So there was another question right there. Yes. Yeah. I use a lot of colors, and what colors don't I like? That's a really funny question. No one's ever asked me that. I hate yellow and brown as a combo. I've always found that like really that like I grew up in Europe, and they like banana flavored snacks like choco banana, um, and I think I have a really like nauseous car ride association with the colors yellow and brown together. I also find like a particular like limey yellow and a particular ultramarine blue to be like really aggressive, like the Best Buy combo. Not my favorite, but it's completely subjective. And all of you should hate it too, or get out. I mean, it's yeah, totally subjective, but it's you in the back, yeah, yes, yes, definitely, yeah. I'll show you that right now. I'll just start a little quick demo here while we're talking. So the question was, I mentioned using the soft brush. Can I show you guys sort of specifically how that works in Procreate? So probably a lot of you are familiar with Procreate. Probably some of you aren't. I won't do the super basic talk, but if you have like, questions about the really fundamental stuff about like setting up and creating a new layer and stuff like that, feel free to talk to me after if there's anything specific. I usually like to tone my canvas very slightly. My stuff always starts with this like beige. It's just more relaxing to my eyes. Um, I'll do a quick sketch, and it's going to be a beardy old man because when my brain turns off and I'm scared of what this room full of people thinks, I draw a beardy old man. That's just what I do. Uh, so this is, I'll just demo the sort of soft brush stuff that you just asked about. But while I'm doing this, is there another question I can be answering? Yes. Hi. Yeah. Okay. So what's been the biggest challenge in the last 4 years since picking up the iPad? Um, I hope it's not too honest or trite to say like myself. Uh, being a freelancer and having all of this freedom, to sort of work from wherever and in whatever way makes it very obvious that like any shortcomings are like mine. So if I'm struggling with anxiety over peace or I'm being avoidant or whatever, like that's just I can't blame it on the tool because now I'm so comfortable with the tool that uh, it's just me. I'm just drawing the same old dude that I've been drawing like all day. I would say that though specific to the program, um, yeah, the layer cap is definitely a struggle at times. But biggest challenge. I'll see. Here we go. Now we're gonna get into this like long mumbly while I'm drawing phase. Um, probably. Um, wow, I'm really bad at that particular. I thought I could answer questions while I draw, but apparently not. The giant mustache that I aspirationally have in my head. Um, throw down the beard in the places that it specifically doesn't grow for me that I wish that it did. I'm really excited about being old. I think it's just you draw what you love, and I just want to be an old dude real bad. I literally have this giant curly mustache on my face, but I also smoke a pipe. Like I wear the weird little old man hat, and I long for suspenders, and I know that I look like a giant, awful stereotype hipster, like when I'm fully geared out. But at the moment I get to this age, it'll be great. No one will. What's that? I do. I sit in coffee shops. I may as well be like playing checkers and just like, yeah. Okay, this is probably, yeah, yeah. What's his name? Jerry's Game? Is that what it is? Yeah. Um, yeah. The biggest challenge also is like, online, like keeping up a social media presence. That's kind of unrelated to the app itself, but like, um, the constant press of like, freelance is quite difficult because you're always wanting to like keep the machine going, even if you're working on super secret things that are like piling up in the background that you can't show. And I'm at the point where I still have a lot of imposter syndrome, and I wish I had made it to that panel. For instance, I'm deathly afraid of the question asker. He's very good. But at this point, I'm actually like quite happy with a lot of the work that I do. It's just that not all the work that I'm the happiest with is work that I can show. And so you get quite self-conscious about the fact that like, oh, the work that's out there is outdated, and there's new things I'm doing, and I can't show them to anybody. Sometimes that becomes like late nights doing fan art just to prove like I can do this. See. So this is going to take a little bit to fill in, but such is demoing. Another question? Wrap it up soon. Oh, dang. Okay. Kylie. Do it. 23rd. Are you asking permission to embarrass me in front of this room of people and sing happy birthday? Because I'm going to say no, but you could do it anyways if you want. I'm sorry, actually, if you could put the lights on them, I want to see every face that just said, yeah. All right, go ahead. Somewhere in suburban Rhode Island, like Terry Cole just like cried a single tear. It's just like, good. Thank you. Sorry, really quick for the soft brush question. So right here with a 2-finger swipe, I'm locking the pixels. I go in here, I grab whatever color I want. I use my big soft airbrush, and I just sculpt whatever gradient situation I want out of that. And then I can go back in and sort of bring my sort of flesh tone back in over here, and mix it without doing just like circle gradient, circle gradient, circle gradient, circle gradient. We have got to wrap up. Dang it. Okay. Alpha masking. Select the, freehand, sorry. Select that, so I select the layer, see the diagonal bars, create a new layer, tap that layer, click mask, and now that layer has a mask of that selection. What I'll usually do to start is then I'll duplicate that blank layer with that mask a bunch of times, and then begin to flatten the colors that are going to fall inside that shape, stacked in the way that they must be. But guys, I'm so sorry. I'm being like comically candy caned off the stage right now. But thank you so much for coming. You guys have been amazing.